Alright, I'm sure at some point you knew we were going to get to this part of history. This topic is not going to be all that fun, but I hope that it's interesting and maybe relevant. In life, you might have wondered, how did someone like Hitler happen? How does that even work? Why would people like that guy with the toothbrush mustache? And how did silent film star Charlie Chaplin cope with having his trademark facial hair co-opted by one of the most evil men to have ever had power? So, as we begin to approach this lecture about fascism, I thought we might have some questions that guide our lecture. These are kind of like research questions, and one of the things that I had hoped to do during our class was to produce a research paper, and part of that process is talking about formulating research questions and how those guide our research. Well, we've gotten rid of that research paper requirement because of this whole situation we're in. I didn't think it'd be fair to you guys to make you do a research paper when you don't necessarily have access to campus resources and things like that. So, Dr. Warwick being nice for you. Anyway, for the purposes of this lecture, we're going to encounter and try to answer these questions. So first, what were some of the tenets of fascism? Fascism is one of those things that's a little bit hard to nail down definitively. Political scientists struggle with this, but we're going to look at some of those tenets of fascism. Secondly, how did Benito Mussolini come into power in Italy? Mussolini is the father of fascism. How did he take power? What were the effects of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany? Now, the Great War video did talk a lot about the Treaty of Versailles and introduced the doubt that, the Treaty of Versailles didn't necessarily lead to World War II. Fourth, how did a failed artist become one of the most evil men in history? And I'm talking about Hitler there, of course. And then fifth, what other countries had fascist rulers? We're not going to have time to detail all of them, but we are definitely going to take a look at Spain, another example here. Well, let's go ahead and get started talking about the tenets of fascism. So I have a few of these tenets listed here on the slide, and we'll just kind of go through these. I don't want to elucidate too much about them. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. But fascism is, in many ways, a reaction to liberal democracy and an embrace of totalitarianism. So the idea was that people voting didn't know what they were doing, right? If you pay someone enough money, they'll just vote however you want them. People can't be trusted to elect their leaders. This is part of the reason we're a republic, not a democracy. This idea is very elitist. People don't know what they're doing, that kind of an idea. But it's also an idea against not just democracy, but against kind of representative government and parliamentary governance. Parliaments take too long to react to crises, and we need someone who can act. We need the man who will lead this country. They want the guy. So relying on that idea of a strong leader, a dictator, il duce, as we'll talk about with Mussolini, that feeds right into that totalitarian regime. Fascism is also ultra-nationalist and often relies on racism. It relies on exclusion. It's kind of a whole us versus them, this binary. They're not German, we are. They're not Italian, we are. They are not with us, they are against us. And if they're against us, they need to be put out and gotten rid of, exterminated. That's how Adolf Hitler is going to approach the Jews. Say, Jews are not Germans. They're not true Germans. They have to be exterminated. That's the final solution. Fascism relies upon obedience to the state, people's obedience to the state, and promises order. Now, fascism is often brought out of these very trying circumstances. Italy and Germany, as we'll talk about both countries, they were in very bad positions coming out of the war for different reasons. And these dictators, like Hitler, like Mussolini, promised order. They were going to bring order back to society. Things were going to get moving again because they were going to make it happen. So Hitler promised order. It's kind of zero tolerance on petty crimes, right? There's people, maybe they're loitering. They need to be locked out because they're not working for the betterment of the German state. They're just lounging around. People who commit minor shoplifting, they're harshly punished because they're stealing against the state, right? This is giving a segment of the German people what they wanted, right? Putting criminals in jail, no matter how small. Bringing order. And also bringing order to the economy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that whenever we start talking about Hitler and the German economy. Fascism is in opposition to communism and socialism. One of Hitler's biggest enemies, as he writes about in Mein Kampf, were communists, were Marxists, were socialists. And as I will mention this once, and I will mention it again, just because the name socialist was in the Nazi Party name, doesn't mean they're socialists. They were very much against socialism. There's also, of course, the use of propaganda to glorify the regime. Propaganda has existed for years before this, and of course you see that in the World War propaganda as well. The propaganda is up and it is everywhere to kind of beat people over the head in their day-to-day lives. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, right? The obedience to the state, pushing that through. And reminding people to do their duty, to rat out people who were against the state. And fascism, this sounds kind of simple, promised simple solutions to complex problems. Coming out of a world war, both Germany and Italy and other nations were all facing these very complicated problems, and especially Germany coming out with Article 231 and the Treaty of Versailles. But they were choices made, right? There were choices made on that step. Hitler wasn't guaranteed. Il Duce, Mussolini, was not guaranteed. But by promising simple solutions to complex problems, they got enough people behind them that they could take control and take over countries. Now, the name fascism actually comes from this symbol here, the fascis. It's a Roman symbol of authority. And what it is it's this kind of bundle of rods that's gathered together. Think of it like a pencil, right? If you've got a wooden pencil, you can break that pretty easily. If you have a dozen pencils, it's harder to break them. Right? The idea of being stronger together. And this is an ancient Roman symbol of authority. And Il Duce, Mussolini, he's going to put these up everywhere. This particular fascis comes from a little bit closer to home. This is in the United States Capitol. Those Roman symbols are also all over the United States Capitol. So now that we're about 7.5 minutes into this, I think I'm going to go ahead and put a pin on the first part of the lecture, and in the next section we're going to pick up talking about Italy and Mussolini, the father of fascism.